Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 10-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It helps the channel a lot. Let's go and get into the pitchers today. So we do have Garrett Cole here. He has faced Detroit in his last start and scored 23 fantasy points with 7 strikeouts. It's usually unwise to use pitchers versus opponents they just faced, but I actually think he has the upside to have a bigger game than he did previously. Though he is high risk, high reward because he just faced them, he is in play today. Then we'll look at Bassett. Oopsie. Bassett for Toronto. His floor is lower than I'd like it to be, given that he's given up more than 3 earned runs in about half of his last 6 games. He's capable of a big game here, and he has 25 fantasy point upside, but he's a little bit high risk, high reward as he's been somewhat streaky recently. But he does have a good matchup here against Oakland. Then we'll look at Dylan Case for Chicago White Sox. Now he's been robust today. He's either going to score over 27 fantasy points, or he's going to be sub 7 or 8. He's capable of a big game here, and his K rate has been decent, but he's also been giving up a lot of earned runs in some games, and that really does limit his potential for a good game, though he is capable of it today in this matchup. Then we'll look at Kramer for Baltimore. His range today is 12 to 22, which is somewhat annoying for a pitcher that has decent upside. He's not giving up a ton of earned runs, but he's also been streaky with the strikeouts. I think he's capable of a big game here, but he's high risk and high reward with multiple home run hitters in the lineup for the Angels. Yeah, so he does have some potential to have a bad game from that perspective. Then we'll look at Quintana for the Mets. He is facing Washington today, and he has 15 to 20 fantasy point range here. He doesn't have big time upside, but he is capable of quality starts, which he's had 6 in his 8 starts on the season. So far, he's only managed 1 win, though, which is the concern here, but he should have some opportunity for that here in this game, and that will give him a little bit of a boost if he can pull a win there as well. And then we'll look at Paft for Arizona. Now, I don't think I've ever used him in fantasy, but he is a very Hail Mary play. He's cheap enough to consider as he has 20 fantasy point upside. His floor is also very low. Obviously, his ERA is 6.21. He's been high risk, high reward all season, but he does have some capacity for some big games as he's had a few decent ones recently. So he is kind of the Hail Mary play of this particular uh, this particular slate. Excuse me. Then we're going to get in our catchers here, and we'll start with Wilson Contreras for St. Louis. He's been pretty solid recently from a home run perspective, as he's had 3 home runs in the last 10. I will say that he's a little bit risky because his batting average has been pretty limited, but he is capable of having a good game. And the last 4 games, he's had 2 multi-hit games, which give him some upside, and he's scoring some fantasy points, and he's pretty cheap, so that gives him a lot of potential here. Alvarez is another guy for the Mets who has some good home run potential today. He's been kind of really slumpy recently, but he definitely has that capacity to hit a home run, though he does need to get out of the slump a little bit probably to be a viable option, a really viable option at least. Then we'll look at Moreno for Arizona. Now, he's hit the ball very well. He also has home run potential today, and he has good fantasy point production for the most part. He's also nice and dirt cheap, and so he's a great option on the slate if you want a contrarian option at catcher that's just dirt cheap. He's a great option. Not only that, good, you can pay up at other positions. Maybe in the first base, we'll look at Cody Ballinger, who is a core play for me today. He can play in the outfield as well. He's hitting the ball very well with a 349 batting average. Obviously, he's super expensive right now, but he's had 3 home runs over the last 10. He's got all sorts of upside here, and he does draw some good potential, though he does need a hit home run really to pay off here. Then we'll look at Wade Jr. for San Francisco. Now, he's been inconsistent throughout the season, and right now he's been a little bit of a slump. But he has had a couple of hits in the last few games, and maybe he's starting to see the ball better. He's also not striking out much, so he is capable. He is getting contact on the ball. He just has to hit it in the right places, and he does draw good potential today, especially in a good matchup here. Then we'll look at Candelario for the Cubs. He could also play at third base. He's been inconsistent throughout the year. He's really been slumpy recently, but he is hitting home runs the last couple games, and that gives him some nice upside here. It's just a matter of getting him get the right hits and stuff. And he's priced pretty fairly, though he's a little bit expensive for what he's been doing recently. He does draw good metrics though, and has nice upside on the slate. And then Christian Walker for Arizona. He's a guy I really like today. He's hitting the ball very well, 300 batting average, has 2 home runs over the last 10 games. He's got that capability. He's scoring fantasy points in good amounts, especially with the home runs. So he's capable of a big game here, and he hit his 30th 2 games ago. Maybe a second base, we'll look at Nico Horner for the Cubs. I really do like the Cubs today. He has been somewhat streaky throughout the season, but he has good metrics for this matchup. He's also managed to score fantasy points without a home run in a decent way sometimes, so he can get multi-hit games and has literally has had some good ones recently. He also is in a very good matchup here against Manea or whoever ends up pitching for the San Francisco Giants. Then we'll look at Marte for Arizona. Now Marte has a huge advantage here against Kyle Freeland, and he's hit the ball pretty well recently with a decent chunk of games. Though I do think he needs to hit a run to pay off here, which he is capable of in this matchup. He is high risk, high reward a little bit, but he's a good contrarian option off the Horner. Estrada is a good cheap play for San Francisco as he's hit the ball pretty good recently. Though the fantasy points per game is down, he does have multi-hit potential. He doesn't need a home run to pay off. But it would definitely be a benefit if he could. But he is a decent option on the slate. And then Gabby Torres, he's a pretty decent option right now as he's hitting the ball very well with a 359 batting average over the last 10 games. He's also had 5 home runs in the last 10. He's a great option on the slate. He's even doing good things when he doesn't hit home runs sometimes, so that's also an advantage. But he's scoring a lot of fantasy points right now, and he's definitely in play. He is expensive, but he is viable on the slate. Maybe in the third base, we'll look at Chris Morel, who can also play in outfield. He's been very streaky throughout the season. He started the season on fire. He's obviously cooled off some, but he does draw home run metrics, and he has nice upside in this matchup, though he's high risk, high reward as his price is pretty high. Candelario can also play at this position. Austin Riley is available here for Atlanta, and he's hit the ball pretty solidly recently with 3 home runs over the last 10 games. He's been a little bit streaky, but he has multi-hit game potential, and he doesn't even need a hit home run to pay off, even at this high price, because he does have that multi-hit potential on the slate. And then Davis for San Francisco is in play here. Now he's been decent recently. He has some home run potential, but he doesn't have a lot of it today. But he is a good viable option on the slate as he has multi-hit potential, though he's high risk, high reward as he has not hit the ball particularly great lately. Then we'll look at Dansby Swanson for shortstop. Now, Dansby has been inconsistent throughout the year, which, he tends to get hot and cold. He is getting some good hits the last few games, though, and he's scoring decent fantasy points in those 2 games. He does draw good metrics for this game as well, and he's a nice option on the slate. And he's been pretty good at home throughout the season. He actually has more home runs at home and hit the ball better, and so I do like his upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at Francisco Lindor for the Mets. Now, he draws interesting upside today, though he's been high risk, high reward lately. He's still managing to get doubles and triples and stolen bases over the last few games, and that's a nice advantage here as he does manage to score fantasy points in pretty good amounts, even if he doesn't hit a home run sometimes. But he does have that potential today to hit a home run as well. And then Crawford for San Francisco. He's a very boomer bust option today. Not a huge home run threat, but he's a guy that can get multi-hit games occasionally and score decent fantasy points, and he's dirt cheap, but he is, a Hail Mary play from that perspective. Maybe in the outfielders, we'll look at Ronald Acuna, who's very expensive, but he's also hitting home runs, stolen bases, doing just about everything. So he's a great option on the slate if you can afford him, but he's going to be hard to roster. Obviously, if he doesn't pay off, then it's going to really sting at this price point. But he has capability of a home run today. Mikolas has been very bad for St. Louis this season. Jock Peterson is also in play today. He was very close to being a core play, but the only issue with him is that he has been somewhat inconsistent lately, and he's not as big of a home run threat as we'd like him to be. But he is capable of that today, and he's got a good matchup for it, and he has multi-hit potential as well. Aaron Judge also in play for the Yankees. Now, he's been hitting home runs recently, but he's really striking out a ton. So do keep that in mind. I think Acuna is a lot safer than him, and they're virtually the same price, but he's high risk, high reward. Cody Bellinger also in play here at the outfield position. Ian Happ is a core play for me as well. I do like the Cubs stack today. He's hitting the ball very well with a 324 average, and he's really raising his fantasy point production during this stretch. Even without home runs, he's managed to score good amounts. The Cubs are actually, scoring a decent amount of runs a lot of times, so he's definitely a capable option on the slate. I think he's a core play and somebody I'm going to try to roster myself a lot. Mike Yastrzemski for the Giants also in play today. He's been pretty solid throughout the season. He's been up and down, and he does draw some home run potential when he plays. But he's high risk, high reward here, as he's nice and cheap, but he's been, kind of streaky. Seiya Suzuki for the Cubs is in play today. He's hit the ball very well recently with almost a 300 average and averaging over 10 fantasy points a game. He doesn't necessarily need a home run to pay off at this price point, but it definitely would give him benefit, and he is capable of that today as he has good metrics for it. Mike Tauchman is also in play for the Cubs. He's been somewhat inconsistent throughout the season, and he's been a little bit slumpy lately. The home run potential is up and down, but he doesn't need it as well. If they can have a big game here, then he is capable of being a solid contributor in it, though he is a little bit risky as well. Brantley, let's see, for the Houston Astros is in play today. He's only played a handful of games, but he did manage to hit a home run 2 games ago. He's got good potential today, though. If you look at his 5 games he's played, he started 4, and in 2 games he's had 14 or more fantasy points, and in 2 others he's had 0. Though he's only struck out once, so it's not really an issue of striking out. It's just a matter of getting a ball on the bat, and he's hitting the ball. He has really good potential in this matchup against a plus situation. Then we'll look at Tommy Pham for Arizona. He's nice and cheap today. He's been somewhat inconsistent. He's not a huge home run threat all the time, but he has some stolen base upside as well. You know, he is striking out a little bit. He does have, but I do like his multi-hit potential today. I think Arizona is an interesting team to stack. Newtbar for the St. Louis Cardinals is in play against Atlanta today. Atlanta is going to have a little bit of a issue with pitching today, probably a little bit at least. And Newbar has hit the ball pretty well recently. He has nice upside and has good fantasy point upside, even if he doesn't hit a home run. Then we'll look at George Springer, who's been very good recently. He's hitting the ball pretty well. He has home run potential. He's even getting some stolen bases. But I expect him just to have a good, solid hitting game, and he's had some multi-hit games recently, which give him some upside. He also doesn't need to hit a home run to pay off, though. It is definitely something he can do, and I would like if he was able to do that today. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.